get started, again, good morning, everybody. My name is Ashley Ellington, and I'm the Education and Outreach Specialist here at Gladney. Just a few things before we get started. Again, CEUs do take about 5 to 7 business days to get to you. When the training is over, a pop-up will come up and you can fill that out if you need CEUs or certificates of completion. If you do miss them, they will come tomorrow in your email, probably by tomorrow afternoon. So you can also fill them out that way. And if you have any questions at all, please put them in the chat and we'll make sure Julie gets to those for you. So without further ado, Julie, I'm going to let you introduce yourself and take it from here.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Ashley. And welcome, everybody. I am so grateful to see all of you guys here. And let me see if I can get going here. I think I'm already going. That's great. I'm Julie Compton. And I, just to give you a little who I am, first kind of info, I've been in education my entire adult career. Most of that was, a big portion of it was spent in working in a behavior unit with kids that had been identified to have emotional and behavioral disorders. And then I became a behavior specialist. And I did that through a local district, and did that for many years, my entire, till I retired. And now I do training for Boys Town and their educational model. I do training for the Bureau of Education and Research, and I also do consulting in the area, always in the area of behavior, autism, special needs. So that's been my whole life, has been, working with kiddos with problems with their emotional regulation and those kinds of things. And so here I am. I had that already in my wheelhouse, I guess. And then things began to happen in my personal life that caused me to have the need and the opportunity to apply a lot of things personally, and to learn more firsthand than I had ever had to previously. So I am a survivor of suicide, and you're going to learn a whole lot more about that, obviously, as we go through this time together. But I just can't tell you how much I am touched and glad to see the interest in this topic. It is not getting better. And, some little pockets of space is getting better, but it is still an ongoing and growing problem. And so the fact that you're giving some of your time to this means a whole lot to me. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and start talking about the topic. You'll notice there that the website or the email address, I'm sorry, not the website, but the email address I have listed there is Healing After Suicide Fort Worth, or FW. That is an organization that we provide it's a closed group that we provide support for survivors of suicide. I really appreciate you hanging on to that. And as you come across people who may need that, or if you just want additional information about it, you can definitely reach out through that address, and we can get you fixed up. But it's a group that I participated in, and then found myself, as we sometimes do, more than a participant. I'm the coordinator for it now. And so, but you'll hear more about that as we go on. But that's the address that I've listed there. So let's see. I'm sharing a screen. So why is it not advancing? Oh, there we go. Okay. Just in 2020, there's always that lag time on numbers. And so the 2020 is the last year that we really have some solid numbers for suicides in the United States. And the number that comes in is 45,855. So, that breaks down, if you do the math, to one about every 11 minutes. And there's some kind of other scary stuff. I know a lot of you, I noticed as you were coming in, you were coming to us from school districts and as CASAs and different things. This is because it's Gladney University, it's a real kid-focused group of folks that are participating. And it's important for us to know that, and when we look at a certain, this number, that for every one suicide that is completed in a teenager, there are conservatively 100 attempts for that one completion. And there's a lot of researchers that think it's closer to 200. So for every one of those, there's a whole lot more attempts out there. Another thing to keep in mind, which I don't think is going to be surprising to many of you, is that there's more boys that complete suicide, and lots of reasons for that, but more males, I shouldn't say boys, males that complete suicide. There's about 4 or 5 attempts and females for every completion of a female suicide. And I've written there that we want to kind of take this out of the realm of, it's not necessarily just a mental health issue, it is a public health issue. And that being the fact that there is that contagion factor. When we see a suicide, then lots of things start to kind of fall into line here, that puts other people at risk that knew the person who completed suicide. It starts to make it a viable possibility. There's lots of research that looks at how when there is that loss to suicide, there is an increase. And so, I can just share this fact that one of my mentors and dear friends that in the area of suicide, she lost a mother to suicide when she was 12 or 13. And then many years later, as an adult, she lost her sister to suicide. And she completed suicide last July. And she was a very big proponent and activist in the area of suicide awareness and suicide prevention and postvention as prevention. So it was a very unexpected, very saddening thing. We felt like she had the support she needed, and we lost her to suicide. So there is that contagion factor. So it makes it it's an issue. It's a public health issue. When you have been exposed to suicide, and by exposure, I just mean, somebody in your circle has, you've lost someone, then you kind of move up the list, you become at risk. You kind of have a number 5 beside your name that could be a possibility for you. Now, of course, there's a lot of other things, a whole lot of other things that have to be in place. And so I lost someone to suicide, and I have never contemplated suicide myself, and that was 11 years ago. So that's I give you that information only for you to understand the importance of why you want to be there to support and help someone who has experienced a loss to suicide. The last thing on this slide is really disturbing to me, and it's sort of some new information to me that I've only become aware of recently, is that what happens often, there's the whole process, the risk assessment that is done. And when someone is then hospitalized because they have some sort of suicidal ideation, there's something they've said or done that has led to them being hospitalized. And we're talking about voluntarily hospitalized folks. Often what is seen is they go into this hospitalization, and then there's really not that is not addressed, and the suicide is not really, or suicidal thoughts are not addressed, and they leave, and we will see an increase in people who will die within 24 hours of their release from a hospital. Now, all of us can start to read into that what we think the cause of that is, but I just think that is a fact we need to know, we need to be aware of. So we need to be, vigilant about. This is another thing for us to recognize. I know we're all extremely aware and alerted right now to the shooters. It just continues and continues to be a problem. And I think that Frank Campbell, who is a suicidologist and is really at the forefront of lots of information surrounding suicide, he talks about that homicides and suicides often live in a duplex in the brain, and that shooters often begin and end as a suicide. And, we've all heard, suicide by cop and those kinds of things. But if we start to recognize that if we intervene and can interrupt and change that trajectory of someone who is feeling suicidal, we would also be preventing homicides that may go along with that. And my son never indicated that he wanted to hurt anybody else or anything, but there is something that seems to always happen every time there is a shooting situation, especially when it is a young man or a young adolescent or an older adolescent. I have this feeling about the parents, about the families that are attached to that. And there's some piece of me that thinks there, but for the grace of God, that could be our story. And I don't even know why I have that feeling, but I do believe that shooters, it's about their feelings and their misery inside of themselves and the suicidal ideation there. So when Frank said that about they live in this duplex in the brain, that just really kind of resonated with me and made it something I wanted to share with you guys today. So we've already kind of touched on that postvention can be prevention. There's a significant number of people that are exposed to suicide that it's not just a tap on the shoulder. It leads to long-term mental health consequences. And as I mentioned, my friend earlier, Leslie ended up being a suicide statistic. And that was, there's never been determined that there's a genetic component here. Brain imaging, functional MRIs are starting to indicate and show us that there may be more negative thought processes that go into some folks, and that can lead to this. But other than that, it's not a genetic thing as much as I believe it is a connection and an exposure that has happened. So it can increase the risk of the survivors themselves. And then the other thing, all grief is difficult. Everyone I'm sure on this in this webinar here have experienced a grief and some sort of loss, and it is difficult for anyone at any time in any situation. But the stigma that surrounds suicide makes it extra complicated. And there immediately becomes this discussion of blame, of guilt, and of shame. And so it can be damaging, obviously, to individuals. In the groups that I help facilitate, there are people there that they just cannot share with other folks how their loved one died, because they don't want their loved one to be seen in that light. They don't want to be seen in that light. So it can be devastating to the individuals. One of the women I just recently had in a group, her husband killed himself, and they had a 2-year-old. And she said, I don't know how I'm going to explain this to her as she grows up, because I don't want her to think negatively about her dad, and I don't want her to think negatively about herself. And those kind of things just aren't discussed when someone dies by illness, like cancer or a heart attack or in a car accident. That those things are not present, but they are with a suicide. And so families are damaged, and then whole communities are. I'm sure y'all can think of situations where there have been a series of suicides over a period of time in a school district or in a community, that then it becomes, people start to judge that community. What are they doing wrong there? What sort of things are they doing? What things are they not doing? And so it becomes this blame game. And so those people who are already grieving, now they carry some other stuff with it. And I even remember, just when I lost my son, I could see the church really didn't know what to do with me, because he had been raised in a youth group, and they had known him for like the last 10 years of his life. And for that to happen, that put a little bit of I don't know if it was greed, a guilt or shame, but they felt weighted down from that, and I felt them pull away from me and my family. And so there was a community that was impacted. And then I know they were terrified of the contagion that may be happening, because that had happened, and he was such an active member of the youth at our church. And so that is always a concern. But the good news is, if you look at that last bullet there, that an organized and an empathic response can minimize these negative outcomes, and they can bring healing to people. And that's where all of you come in. How can you be a part of that? So that's the postvention, what we do after someone has lost someone to suicide. That becomes prevention for negative outcomes in the future. I have heard Leslie used to describe that suicide was the no casserole death, that every other kind of death, the casseroles start rolling in, people start coming in, they start being with you. Suicide, not so much. There's a little distancing, and that is not because people are mean and bad. It's because they're scared, and they also don't know what to say or what to do. So, I'm going to cut them some slack. Anybody that didn't respond the way that I would have liked for them to, I don't think anybody did that out of meanness. So if we look back, or, again, remember that number, that 45,800 and whatever, it's estimated that about 50% of our overall population is going to be exposed to suicide of someone they know. So, you got a 50-50 chance you're going to know somebody. Now, out of that, 115 of those, they're going to describe themselves as having some degree of closeness to that person. So like in my situation with my son, that would be his friends, obviously his friends' parents. It would be his teachers and his pastor at church, and the youth and the families there at church, and all of that. But then we go down more, 25 of them will have lives impacted in a major way. That 115 is going to hurt. It's going to be like that, when you stub your toe and you have to just wait for the pain to kind of to slowly subside. But there's going to be that 25% that is going to stick, and it's going to be something they remember. I mentioned Frank Campbell a minute ago, and where he came into the scene is that he lost a friend as a teenager, young, I guess he was like a preteen, that he lost a friend to suicide. And it did something in his heart and in his mind that led him to this path of mental health, being a mental health professional, but then really focusing on suicide. And then the suicide will have a devastating impact on the lives of about 11 people. So when you do the math, which I did a little while ago, then you take those 45,855, whatever it was, and now we're talking about 504,000 people. 405 is 504, 405. Those numbers are too messy to keep them straight. But over 500,000 people are going to be devastatingly impacted annually by the suicide of someone. So again, it's a public health issue when you look at it in that regard. And this is my connection to suicide. Usually I don't cry because it's been 11 years, getting close to 12 years. But occasionally I look at that face and it hits me again. Chance was 21 and he was a musician and an athlete and a super funny guy and kind of charismatic and artistic. But he also struggled with depression that I really didn't fully understand. And I regret that when we talk about the things you carry as a result of the suicide of someone. I don't carry guilt. I worked through that, but I do definitely have regret. And to me, the difference there, and this might be something that you're going to help a friend or a child that you work with or someone as you speak to them. The difference being guilt is if I intended to cause harm to someone. Regret is I just wish I had done some things differently. I regret that I didn't do more research, and I regret that I didn't understand better. I myself had not ever struggled with depression, and so I didn't really understand it. To me, you just kind of worked your way out of it. And so I think I even had a quote that, I think Abraham Lincoln said it maybe, you're just as happy as you make up your mind to be. And I now know that's not true, but that's something I told him. And so anyway, that's my boy, Chance David Compton, and miss him dearly. But I did not realize he was at risk for suicide. But he was, obviously, and he hung himself at our home and in the garage, and his poor little girlfriend is the one that found him. He had called her and she came to the house and went through the garage, and so she has to carry that. So that is definitely one of those 11 that she will carry, that devastating sight with her always. And that is another reason suicide can be so complicated, because many, many times there are loved ones or people close that are carrying an image, not just a story, but they have an image that they have to carry and work through. So he killed himself at our home. And so that began my journey of trying to figure this whole thing out. So what does a person need? Now, a lot of these, as you read the bullets, my first thought might be, well, that's what anybody in grief needs. But it's a little more deep than that. You have to be willing to really listen. They need to be listened to and they need to be heard. And so often we just want to put lipstick on that pig. We want to make them feel better. And this is complicated. And so we just need to listen and hear what it is that's bothering them. I remember coming home from work one day and feeling the need to just curl up in a ball in bed. And my husband came in and said, "What is it?" I said, "I don't think I swaddled him enough when he was a baby." I had thoughts that day and decided I tried to teach him to self-soothe too soon. I should have swaddled him. And I didn't need somebody to tell me that was silly. I needed somebody to listen and hear me and not judge me. And now I really didn't need somebody to agree with me either. I didn't want looking for somebody to say, "Well, you're right, Julie, you brought all this on yourself." I just needed to be heard. And then this is true of all grief, but an opportunity to tell their story as many times as needed. And the problem with that is that often the story someone may need to tell you is very disturbing. They will have the need to say things and describe things that are your worst nightmare. And so you may not be equipped to do it, and that's okay. Everything isn't for you to do. But if you find yourself in that place and that's what you're wanting to do for that person, to try so hard to not be shocked, to not interrupt, to just listen, to provide that safe and supportive environment that just hears the story, because it is proven. And I say proven because now we just are learning so much by being able to do functional MRIs and really see what's going on in our brains. I really believe someday we're all going to have MRIs on a regular basis just to see how we are. But we see that with every telling of this story, it's not that the grief goes away, but the griever gets a handle on it. They get a little bit bigger, tighter grasp on it. They can manage it a little better. And you've heard sayings like, if you can measure it, then you can manage it. Well, this is sort of that thing in the same way. I feel like if I could speak it, if I would say the words, it started to lose some of its power. And I have watched that because, as I mentioned, I help facilitate the healing after suicide groups. And and I need to make clear, I'm not a therapist. I'm not a social worker. I'm, not even a counselor. I'm not a school counselor. I'm a behavior specialist. I'm an educator and a behavior specialist. But I facilitate those groups as a survivor, and I have watched the telling of the story continue. We had these groups for 8 weeks. And they go from barely being able to speak the story to telling the story in almost graphic, painful ways, to then being able to focus more on the good parts of their loved one's story. So letting them tell the story as many times as they need to is important. I recognized I needed to have a good, and I was blessed with a deep bench is what I call it. I had a lot of people on my team. And so I didn't have to wear any one person out. When I felt like I was pulling too much from somebody, I had someone else I could go to. But that safe, supportive environment. And then they need to be able to express their grief in their own way. Some are very angry. Some are very angry at the person who took their life. And some are as far from anger as it can be. I mean, there's the whole gamut of emotions in there. And there's not a time limit on it. I think we're all learning that. The more we know about trauma-informed care, the more we're learning that, this stuff is going to hang out in our DNA. It is not going to just go away one day. And, but to make sure that, because they will, we will say to people, I should be further along than I am. I should be better than I am. Why did I just stay home and cry all day today? So help them understand, and you give them that space that you're not putting a time limit on it. You're not looking at them going like, here we are 2 months down the road. Why are we still talking about this? So that's some of the areas of what they definitely need. Some of the don'ts, and this first one was not something that bothered me at all. And really today, it still doesn't even bother me, but in the community of suicide and the areas of people who do work in suicidology, we do not use the language or the term committed suicide. And when I first heard that, I thought, oh, come on, people, you're just being too nitpicky. But I really better understand now that, and now it kind of is like fingernails on a blackboard to me too when I hear it. Not so much because it hurts me, but I'm just like, oh, I need to teach you not to say that. Because it kind of harkens back to the days of when suicide was seen as a sin and a crime. And I mean, we just need to, we're not that far removed. It was really just the 60s when the Catholic Church decided to change some of its language. It was considered a crime up until, recent past, very recent past. And so you think, well, how do you punish, how can somebody who's dead be punished for a crime? Well, it could be, there was a time when they were dragged through the streets behind a horse face down and left outside of the city because because they were not going to be buried with everybody else. Their belongings would be taken over by the community. They didn't have access. Their heirs didn't have access to their money and their belongings. And there's lots of societal reasons that attitude was taken. But I'm happy to report it doesn't say anywhere in the Bible that that you're going to burn in hell for suicide, and thankfully I had some friends that came to me very quickly with that information, and with that, so that they said, I don't know what people are going to say to you, but we want to help you, debunk that before anything can catch hold on you. But my younger son, Colin, he actually did experience people saying to him, oh my gosh, you lost your brother, or how did he die? And when he said he killed himself, they said, oh, that must be awful for you to not know where his soul is. And unfortunately, my son has never returned back to any sort of faith. And I hope he does someday, but I completely understand. He got burned pretty bad by that. And so just using some other language, and we're going to give you some I'm going to give you some suggestions for that, but avoiding the term committed. There's also, I've heard people say that they succeeded. And it's like, well, that doesn't sound good either. No, that's not what we're aiming for. And then, of course, avoid platitudes. You're so strong. Time will heal all wounds. They're at peace now. I mean, none of that helps anybody that's in a grieving process. But here's what you can do. You just be truthful and honest that you really don't know what to say. I think the best thing I've ever said to someone when they're grieving to any sort of grief is to say, I have no words, but I'm here. And so it was only like a month after Chance had died that there was another suicide in our district, our school district, that a teacher that had lost her daughter to suicide that was about Chance's age. And someone asked me if I would be willing to go talk to her. And I thought, well, good gravy. What am I going to say to her? I mean, I don't know anything. I'm only a month into this. And but then I thought, well, she's not going to want to see me. She doesn't know me. And so I said, yeah, sure. Just ask her if she wants me to come over. Well, surprise, surprise. She did say yes, that she wanted me to come. And I thought, well, great. Now, what am I going to do? What am I going to say? And so I walked into this house full of her family and friends. And when I saw her, we just sort of looked at one another and hugged. And I said, just breathe, just keep breathing. And she just started sobbing, and we held one another. And then she let go of me, and I could tell, okay, she's done with me. And I said, we'll talk again. And so I left, and then she called and asked me to come by again before the funeral. It was the day of the funeral. And I did. And I said about the same amount of things that day. It was just a couple of sentences that came to my heart. And then I went to the funeral and wasn't sure if I'd be able to stay. And she said, all I needed was to see your face. I didn't stay and have words of wisdom. So I've just shared that for you to know, just your presence. And maybe the less you say, the better it is, because it's easy to step into something that you did not intend. So just saying, I don't understand. I know I don't know where you are, and be honest with that. But just to show up, because I think a lot of people, as I've mentioned, I was very fortunate. I had a really big circle, and I had people that weren't afraid to show up. But as I have helped facilitate groups, and probably in the last 10 years, I have gotten to know personally, I don't know, 200 people, 300 people that have had an immediately after their loss. And most of them experience or feel a shunning or a pulling away. So the fact that you don't pull away, you don't shun them, that you sit with them and you acknowledge that you don't know. That's a big plus. And that's something we can all do. Here's some more neutral kind of terms that you can use. Suicided is a word that I didn't include here because to me it just sounds weird, but it is a term that is used. I probably won't ever use it because it just seems wrong, but died by suicide, took their life, ended their life. One that I've seen recommended is they chose to take their life. And I don't even like that one because I'm not sure when they die by suicide, if that is really a choice in that moment. I think the pain is so extreme, it's not really a choice. So I would avoid that. They may say whatever they want to say to you, but in you talking to them, they might stay a little more neutral by not even discussing that part of it. I know the first time I had a friend that lost her husband to suicide. I don't know, 20 years before Chance died, or 25 years. And I wasn't close to him, but I was close to her. And I was so mad at him. I felt like it was so selfish of him. And now I understand a lot better, that no, it's not necessarily selfishness or cowardliness or a weakness. It's just better not to judge it. And it's not even that they're strong or they're brave, I just, people need to come to their own understanding about why and how their loved one made that decision. And that's not for us to interject our thoughts. And then we just have to avoid I want to make it simple. I want to put a bow on it. I think I mentioned earlier, put some lipstick on that pig. That's not really possible. It's not simple. I wish it were. I wish we could say he or she had this one thing that happened that caused this, and if we'd only known that that but it's not simple. And so I invite you to think of it this way and maybe help the person. And I don't know, some of you may be dealing with a child that has come to you that has just lost someone in their circle, their family, their friends to suicide. If helping them maybe see this, that maybe they had a fight with that loved one, the night before this happened or shortly before it happened, helping them realize that there are many drops in someone's life. And so if they picture our lives, all of them, as being like this bowl, and from the second you're born, you start getting these little drops in your bowl. And if we think of the drops as not good things, they're things that are hard. They're harsh words that somebody speaks. It's a failure that someone experienced. It's a loss, a disappointment, any of those things. And we know all those things can fall under financial situations, relational information, physical, health-wise, all sorts of things that are being dripped into that bowl. And it's not that last little drop that made it overflow. It's the combination of all those drops. And so I look at my job is to help poke some holes in that bowl, to help people let a little bit out so that there's some more space, because we're never going to stop receiving the difficult things dripped into our bowl. But if we keep having enough healthy things happen that can release some, then we may have room for it. And for whatever reason, our loved one's bowl had reached its capacity and it overflowed at that one moment. And so if you can, I know my own family, I wasn't speaking to Chance when he died. I had been working out of town that week, and I'd gotten mad at him the weekend before. He'd moved back in with us, and I had not responded to his text messages or his calls that week. And so when he died that night, that was the first thing I thought about. Was that what caused it? And someone said to me, and I know this sounds harsh, and some of you may not appreciate that someone said it to me, but it made sense to me. I guess they knew I needed to hear it. They said, well, you certainly have a high opinion of yourself. And what do you mean? And it was that I had that kind of power in someone's life. And when I realized that I'm a part of I was a part of Chance's life, but I didn't have that kind of control in his life. I began to let go of a little bit of that, but I invite you to, however you find yourself interacting with someone who has lost someone to suicide, to do this little bowl, bucket, cup, glass analogy with them, and even give them a visual. Say, let's just sit here and talk about what were the things that were putting drops in their cup or their bowl. And that has been something that I've watched help a lot of people as we have moved through our groups and things of helping them realize that there's a lot there. So there's that. Oh, wait, no, good. I thought I'd cut you all off, but I just went to the next slide. I want you to think about the other thing that's super interesting to me is that about 40% of the people that when someone says, okay, if you were thinking about hurting yourself, you're thinking about suicide, and let me just kind of stop there. I encourage you to not use the language, are you thinking about hurting yourself, which is what I just said. I encourage you to say what you're thinking, to call it what it is. Are you thinking about killing yourself? Are you thinking about taking a life? Your life, not a life. Are you thinking about taking your life? But when asked people, who would you tell? Most people are going to go talk to someone in their family or a friend. And I think that's probably most of you in this room or on this Zoom meeting, that you are that person. You are that trusted person that someone could actually say, this is how I'm feeling. And so you are now not responsible for saving their lives. You are responsible, though, for listening, being available. And the reason I used a lighthouse here is that you can be that light to them, to guide them into the harbor. Now, once they get in the harbor, now you know the job now is to find the other help that they need. You have to be careful that you don't take on that ownership, and your well-being will then be compromised, and you will also be operating outside of you'll be getting out of your lane. And I remember I have a sweet friend that she said, I just told them, and this wasn't about suicide, it was something else. She said, you're getting in my lane, and I want you to look, there are concrete barriers on both sides of this. And so I always get that HOV picture in my mind when I'm thinking about myself. I need to get back into my lane, and I'm hearing my fenders rub that concrete. I need to be sure I'm staying where I belong. And I'm going to share some resources with you, but I'm sure most of you here are well aware of resources that are available. And there is some super exciting research that's being done, and we want to guide people to all of those avenues and all of those areas. But the first thing is for you to be that light. That's all you have to be. And oh my goodness, it kind of got emotional, but don't be afraid. I always tell people it goes just as fast as it comes. But how many times I have just sat and listened to someone and said a few things, and then they're like, you just don't know how much you helped me. And I feel like I didn't do anything. But it's in the listening, it's in your presence, it's in your not being shocked, you not being judgmental, you using few words, and letting them guide the conversation. But then we got to help get people what they need. And so many people that have been exposed to suicide now need to look outside that and look for help beyond that. So let me see, why are we not changing to the next slide? Oh, before we go to that next one, I know we've all heard the starfish story. But there it is, if you haven't, for you to read, or if you just need to be reminded of it. But I think especially today, and maybe this is true in every generation from the beginning of time, all the problems seem so big and so many. When I hear 45,000 people, how can I possibly help? We're just going to do it one starfish at a time. We're going to, that one that washes up in front of us. If you feel equipped to be that first beacon of light that for them, then that's that one, and it's going to matter to that one. And so I feel often overwhelmed at the needs in this world. And and mine are typically focused on kids, and I'm sure most of you can imagine when we talk about stigma and things surrounding suicide. I spent my entire career helping troubled kids, and then my own child kills himself. That was pretty heavy. That was pretty humbling. It was caused some soul searching to go on. But so I just kind of throw that in there that it's tough. We can know everything we need to know, and it can still knock the wind out of us, and it can still sneak up on us and surprise us. And but the idea that we can be that beacon, that help for that one person, and then the next person and the next person, we're making a difference. And so if everybody that is here today listening to this does something different to help somebody, and then that person helps, the whole ripple is pretty darn amazing. So just like the drops in the cup can be overwhelming, they can also add up to a lot of good stuff as well. So here are some resources that are in Tarrant County. Now, I know a lot of you are not in Tarrant County. I was noticing as you were popping in, you're from different places, which I just love that. These things exist in other communities as well. But the local outreach to suicide survivors, and the name of it is the LOSS team, LOSS, of Tarrant County. And again, Frank Campbell that I mentioned earlier, he is the father of the LOSS team. And LOSS teams exist throughout they're in Berlin. They're not just an American thing, it's across the world, but not every community has one. Dallas County doesn't have one. Tarrant County does. Denton County does. But that is a wonderful resource. And what begins there at that point is that when the medical examiner, and this is run through MHMR, and when the medical examiner contacts the loss coordinator, then she puts together a mental health professional and a survivor to reach out to that person. Sometimes it's on scene support. I have been there while the EMTs are still there dealing with the scene while the police officers are there. I've done a delayed call. A lot of my connections with survivors is over the phone or over a cup of coffee 2 weeks later. But what we do know is that the sooner someone gets access to resources, then the sooner they actually will get or partake in the resources. They may not do it right then, but it's something like the difference between getting help within 4 months and 4 years. And so you can imagine, if we've already talked about you having an exposure to suicide puts you at a greater risk. And if you wait 4 years to get any help, my friend that took her life, she did not seek help for 30 years after her mother's death. And then she was responsible for bringing the loss team to Tarrant County. And then she lost her sister to suicide. And then she lost a brother, but not to suicide. And it became worse than she could carry. The Healing After Suicide of Tarrant County, that is the group that I help facilitate. And we are a closed group that we have a group that comes in and we meet for 8 weeks. And there's a mental health professional and a survivor that facilitates the group. And the groups are usually 10 or less. They are meeting virtually and we're ready to go back to in person. And just as a little infomercial, I am in desperate need of mental health professionals that would be willing to volunteer. If I have the number of professionals I need, you don't have to do one group a year, so if you're interested, please reach out to me. I'm in desperate need. We have like 5 great ones, but unfortunately we need a lot more. And we will train you and we'll hook you up. Jordan Elizabeth Harris Foundation, Ashley shared with me that they did a webinar for the Gladney University earlier this summer or this month. They are fabulous, and they are how I learned about all the research that's being done out of UT Southwestern, the Center for Depression Research, and that is the largest and longest study that has been done on depression. And I'm a member of that. I participate in that. I mentioned to you that I did not feel like I'd ever had dealt with depression other than just, some situational stuff that would come up. Well, after Chance's death, and then I lost my husband to cancer. My husband was actually diagnosed about 2-3 weeks after Chance died. My husband found out he needed to go be seeing an oncologist, and then he died 5 years later. But I thought, I think I may be depressed. So I am a part of that study. So Jordan Elizabeth Harris, that foundation is amazing, and they do a lot of work for prevention, research, and things. The Grace Lawn Car Foundation, some of you may recognize that name. Grace took her life. They lived in Dallas, and then 2 days after her funeral, her dad killed himself, Brian Lawn Car. And her sister Sally has started the Lawn Car Foundation. And one of the places they put their funds is into scholarships for especially teenagers to get access to hospitalization and counseling and the support they need, which can be very expensive. And it doesn't always last as long as it needs to, as we talked about. A lot of times within 24 hours, somebody's killed themselves after leaving a hospital. So the Lawn Car Foundation is working to provide support so people can get, they partner with a hospital that is a 90-day placement rather than 30 days. And then Survivors of Suicide for Grief and Healing, that's an open group that is run through MHA. And they meet, used to be bi-weekly, but I think currently it's meeting once a month. It's an open group the first Tuesday of every month. So those are just a few resources that are local that help us help survivors and help us be postvention for prevention, so to speak. So I just am so grateful, so extremely grateful for this opportunity to share my story, to share my son's death in a way that will hopefully help somebody else do better, know better. I love Maya Angelou's saying of, when we know better, we do better. And so I hope that there's something you have heard today that will help you do better. And I'm sure you're already doing amazing things out there, or you wouldn't be spending your time sitting with me right now, that there's things that you care about. And so thank you for that. And thank you to the Gladney University for this opportunity. Now, there may be some questions some folks may have, and I'm going to stop sharing so that maybe we can do that a little more easily. But I'm happy to answer questions or whatever else might be needed.
If you have any questions, put them in the chat. Sonia did ask if you mind sharing the presentation with
I'm
them.
happy to do that.
Okay, if you send it to me, Julie, I will get it to Nancy.
Okay.
And
Okay. Be happy to
send that out. Thank you. Thank you for sharing your story, Julie.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Yes. Natalie said, thanks for sharing the guidance on language. That's something I'm definitely going to take away from that as well, because I also had not heard of the language before. So, yeah. Lots of thank yous. Does anyone have any questions before we wrap up? Okay. Oh, just lots of thank yous. Everyone's appreciative. So yes, thank you so much. The drip analogy. Yes, I loved that as well. All right. You will, when we log off in a second, you can fill out for your CEUs or certificates of completion. We have some awesome trainings next month, so be sure to check out our website, and we'd love for you to join us for that as well. So thank you, Julie, so much. We appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you. It's
Bye.
nice to be here. Y'all have a good day.
Bye, everyone.